After ages, I'm finally back, and I'm finally making another video, and I'm finally making another video on Yorkshire folklore. Now, because I'm a contrarian and I like doing everything differently to everyone else, I'm going to do this differently as well, and differently to my last video on Yorkshire folklore. And this is actually because I have a few problems with this topic, and the problem is this. Not this book in particular, but what it represents, because I'd say the vast majority of books on folklore for the general reader are just collections of stories, written by people who've read other collections of stories. And that might be nice and interesting in itself, but to me, that's always felt a little empty, a little intangible. And there's also a second problem. So if I flick to a random page, like, okay, here's a story of the donkey, the table, and the stick. Now, that might be a nice story, but how do we know that this is a genuine piece of folklore? How do we know that the author hasn't just made it up right then and there? And actually, I was considering telling this whole story about this ghost who haunted a pub in Hull, and then go, psych, I actually made all of that up, but you'd have still believed me, and you'd have still believed that this was actually a 400-year-old piece of folklore. And that's kind of my problem with it. So what I'm going to be doing with this video is I'm going to be looking at the tangible bits of folklore, the things which we can see and feel, and particularly the things which actually show how people engaged with this folklore. How did they turn it into rituals, into performances, into part of their culture and daily life? So that's what I'm going to be doing today. So let's look at this part of Yorkshire's hidden history. Churches, banners, kings and queens, factories and big machines, castles, forts and in-betweens are stories that are told. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is really quite odd. They're small stone disembodied heads, and they can be found all over Calderdale. In fact, hundreds have been found there. They can be found in windows, doorways, bridges, basically anything that acts either as an entrance or a boundary. These boundary guardians are supposed to protect people from whatever nasty things are out there, and the fact that a lot of them are quite hidden away rather than being in public view suggests that they served a more magical function than simply a decorative one. There's a lot of debate about the exact origins of this tradition. A lot of people believe it goes back to Celtic times, citing the fact that Calderdale's quite close to the old Celtic kingdoms, but there's still a lot of debate about it. However, what's truly fascinating and actually more important is just how long these traditions have gone on for. There's a stone head on the Hebden Bridge Rochdale Canal, and this was made in 1795. So for all that time, these traditions have been going on. In fact, even in 1971, the landlord of the Old Sun Inn in Haworth was warned that he should have a stone head on the doorway to protect the pub against a ghost which haunted the place. Now, the next one is quite amusing. They're called Sheelagh gigs, and they're carvings found all over Britain and Ireland, a lot of the time in churches. And well, let's just say, they're women exposing themselves. There's one in the Church of St James in Nunburnholme, which is near Pocklington in East Yorkshire. As you can see, it's fairly self-explanatory, and also notice the zigzag carving next to it, which is a classic Norman feature, and suggests that this was carved during the Norman era. Another example is in St Mary's Church in Woodkirk, West Yorkshire, dating from the 12th century, and the fact that there's another one only 9 miles away in Cleckheaton suggests that this was a really widespread tradition. There's a load of these in Yorkshire, so if you want to see them, then you've got a lot to keep yourself busy. As for the origin and meaning of these, the most common suggestion is that they came from the Normans. Not only do they feature most heavily in Norman churches, but the areas in Ireland which they appear heaviest are the areas in which the Normans settled. Now, as for the meaning, there's actually no consensus. Nobody really knows what they mean. Some have suggested a symbol of fertility, others protections against evil, and even a warning against lust, but really nobody knows. The final thing we're going to look at today are witch posts, and these are things so unique to Yorkshire, especially to the North York Moors, that only 2 have ever been found outside of Yorkshire. So they really are spectacularly unique. And what they essentially are X marks or St Andrew crosses carved onto either fireplaces or wooden posts inside the home, aimed at warding off witches. The belief is that witches would try and enter your house through the chimney, so to prevent against that, you'd carve these crosses everywhere. They're a really classic example of 17th century superstitions, and a famous example can be found at Rydale Folk Museum in North Yorkshire, which is a fantastic day out, I must say. That's all we've got time for today, but I hope you've enjoyed it and I hope you've learned something new. And I'll see you again soon.